Thank you. I'm sure we have a quorum. I see Senator Pangilinan, Munya Barnes, Yamashita, Mabini, Duenas, Tyheran, Palacios, Gutherds, Cruz, Ada, and the other Ada. Ada 1 and Ada 2. Okay. Iminat Tentai Unu na Legislature Guam session is called to order. I recognize our Assistant Majority Leader, Senator Gutherds, for a motion to adopt today's session agenda.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Speaker, I move to adopt today's session agenda dated December 19, 2011.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. I would like to ask if Senator Pangilinan, if you can lead us in prayer this morning.
Panogi. Ina ni Tatay, lahi niya Espiritu Santo. Amen. Sa ina Jesus, itatamo mo na iyam ni Hago para usad ba itano. Anayam lo kwe todo ni hemplu ni taimano sinya tatsogui yan na tsotso. Tada mas tatkilo para tafana guayza at tafana famaulik. Eno leksyon niya ginilala niya gwinigitano. Gininanawa tada mas kumuta osgi ano na komanda sempre mas maulik dan matu ipas gitano. Esti pago na infafana imamaila ni para taonra ni mafanyagunya. Pwede mon manpas i corazon mami, manpas i komunidad mami, dan manpas i tao-tao mo todos kwinigitano. Ginalitate lahinya dan Espiritu Santo. Amen.
Judge Masi, can I ask Senator Tom Ada if you can lead us in the Inifresi?
Inifresi, ginini mas tatkilo gihina soko, e mas tatkilo gi corazon ho, zani mas figo na nina sinaho, u fresen maisazo, para bayu protege, zanu defendi, i hinengi, i cultura, i lenguaje, i airi, i hanom, zanitano zamoro, ni irin shako, diretso ginina zuo stata, Este hua fitma gihilo i Biblia zani banderaho i bandera nguahan.
And if Senator Chris Dwinish, if you can lead us in the Guam hymn, and Senator Mabini for the singing of the national anthem.
Ah
very much, Senators. I'd like to ask the clerk to please take roll call.
Senator Tom Adda. Senator Tony Adda. Senator Blas. Vice Speaker Cruz. Senator Duenas. Senator Gutherts. Senator Mabini. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Palacios. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Respicio. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Silva Tyron. Speaker Wampet.
Present.
And Senator Yamashita. Madam Speaker, I wish to report there is a quorum.
Thank you very much, and I also recognize Senator Frank Blas Jr. I recognize Senator Guthers for an approval of the Legislative Journal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning again, and good morning, colleagues. Madam Speaker, I move to approve the daily journals of November 1st to 8th, 2011, subject to corrections.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. On communications, do we have any? Madam Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are communications and petitions, and I move to waive its reading and to append them to today's journal.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. Messages from the Governor.
Madam Speaker, there are messages from the Governor of Guam, and I move to waive its reading and to append them to today's journal.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered. Standing committee reports.
Yes, Madam Speaker, there are reports of standing committees, and I move to waive its reading and to append them to today's journal.
Any objections? No objections, so ordered. Any reports of select committees?
Madam Speaker, there are no reports of select committees at this time.
Okay. On the introduction and first readings of bills.
Madam Speaker, I move that bill numbers 111-31 COR to bill number 118-31 COR and resolution number 51-31 to resolution number 54-31 be given its first reading.
Senator, reading what we have here, do you mind if you go to the where it has the agenda itself and read instead the introductions and first readings of bills and resolutions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, bills number 36931 to bill 397-31, resolution number 267 to resolution number 286-31, certificate number 101-31 to certificate number 108-31, and resolutions and other certificates.
On that motion, without any objections, and so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I also like to move that Senator Respicio be excused from today's session.
Without any objections, so ordered. Okay.
Madam
so-
Speaker, I move to excuse again Senator Respicio for the record.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator, for that. There were no objections.
Madam Speaker, I move that all legislative resolutions and certificates of a congratulatory, commendatory, or condolence nature introduced before the end of this legislative day be considered to have had its first reading, and that they be adopted by the body, and that all members be listed as co-sponsors, and to allow the legal counsel to make technical corrections as are necessary or as recommended by the author.
Any objections? No objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I move to place the nominations of the following onto the legislative agenda for today.
Okay, so can you read?
Yes, I'm looking for the list.
Individuals on second page of the agenda?
Yes. Yes, from the Committee on Utilities, Mr. William Barry to serve as a member of the Guam Building Council with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Utilities to affirm and to support the appointment of John P. Duenas to serve as a member of the Guam Building Code Council with a recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Education and Public Libraries, on the appointment of Ms. Asuncion P. Guerrero to serve as a member of the Guam Commission for Educators Certification with the recommendation to confirm. From the Committee on Public Safety, Law Enforcement, and Judiciary, on the appointment of Mr. Joey Cruz San Nicolas to serve as Chief of the Guam Fire Department. And from the Committee on Municipal Affairs, Tourism, Housing, and Recreation, on the appointment of Ms. Feliciana T. Tainatongo to serve as the youth member on the Parks and Recreation Commission.
So Senator, a motion then to move it down to the voting
Madam
file?
Speaker, I so move to place the bills on the voting file and
No,
the
no,
nominations.
just the
on
legislative confirmations.
Okay, just the confirmations on the
confirm-
voting
yes.
file.
Not the bills yet.
Sorry.
So it is clear to
Sorry.
everybody, it's just the nominations
The
to be
nominations,
placed in the
yes.
voting
Thank you,
file.
Madam Speaker.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. Thank you. Okay,
Sorry.
no problem, Senator. So we are now then on the second reading file.
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Uh,
So the first bill on the agenda then is Bill number 112-31, and I recognize the author, Senator, one moment, I'm sorry, Senator,
Madam Speaker, I just want to raise under the motions, there's a veto of a bill by the governor on 241. And I've asked to receive a copy of that. It's not in our file. I just want to, I guess, make note that I may return to motions at a later time during the session to make the motion to consider a motion to override on it. But
so you don't want to do it now then to place
no,
it?
well, it's not here. The veto
No,
message is
we
not
don't have
here.
it yet. It's coming,
And then I'm
so-
also trying to
So
find.
you want to make that motion then,
At a
that we
later
would
time.
come back,
Yes.
you're right.
Thank
So on that motion then to allow Senator Pangilinan to come back once we receive the vetoed bill number 241, to come back to place it on the agenda without any objections to order. So Senator Tony Ada, you are recognized for bill number 112.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill 112 in the third reading file. I'd like to speak on the motion, please.
You may proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 11231 would authorize the sale of a small severed fractional lot of land trust to the adjacent landowner. Madam Speaker, this triangular-shaped lot, it consists of about 114 square meters and is bordered by the lot of the prospective purchaser. And then on the other side, it's by wetlands. Well, actually, it is a wetland area. And at 114 square meters, this lot is roughly the 1/10 the size of a standard house lot. And it's small, odd shape, and location near wetlands. It really gives it little economic value as a standalone lot. And at the introduction of 112, we complied with the provisions of law, and 2 appraisals were filed with the bill at the time. And this sale would immediately raise approximately $20,000 for the Chamorro Land Trust. And in addition to that, on an annual yearly basis, it would also increase the tax, the property taxes paid annually on the lot for the lot owner. Madam Speaker, this bill is very similar to that of Bill 1731 that we passed into law this year, and Governor Cowell signed it in, that we passed, and Governor Cowell signed it into law as Public Law 3153. So it's very similar, and I ask that my colleagues support this piece of legislation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the motion, Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on its face, I think that there is good reason to consider and entertain this piece of legislation. But I think when you consider the implications and the precedent it sets, therein lies the challenge for this body to show their commitment to a program that was established about an individual actually I spoke about yesterday at the University of Guam's commencement address, which I was privileged and honored to be given the opportunity by the graduating class and the administration of the University of Guam. And that is Senator Paul Bordallo. And the program that I talk about is the Chamorro Land Trust program. Madam Speaker, I guess the missing discussion in this is that this property is part of the Chamorro Land Trust inventory. I think the second thing, and I'm still not able to confirm, but I mean, we've confirmed it, but I would venture to say that that other developments may have occurred. But the property is not a fractional lot. The property is actually part of the bigger lot. So it's not a standalone lot. It is a odd-shaped finger of the boundaries of the Chamorro Land Trust property. So it has to be severed. It has to be cut off in order to be sold. It's not standing there all by itself. So it is part of the bigger lot. And so what this bill does, Madam Speaker, is it sets that precedent for taking and severing lots of the Chamorro Land Trust and then selling it to a non-eligible recipient. And so while, again, I do want to say that on its face and if this was not part of the Chamorro Land Trust, then I think this decision would be pretty easy. Because the individual properties here, the owner of the property that will receive this lot and the opportunity to buy it, had some property taken from him, I think, in the creation of West O'Brien Drive. But it's the idea of severing the property, taking it out of the Chamorro Land Trust, selling it to a non-eligible beneficiary of the trust. And so I just caution, for me, it's just very, very simply a principle that will not support taking inventory out without replenishing that inventory, and ensuring that there was discussion about the property of maybe, under a long-term lease, that they could lease this property so that it remains part of the inventory. The individual that is impacted by this odd-shaped lot can continue to develop his lot. We can make a special law that says this will be a 50-year lease or a 99-year lease. And that way we don't begin the precedent of selling off Chamorro Land Trust inventory lands. And so that's the reason why I rise in opposition to this bill. Not in opposition to fixing something of a problem that has been created, not a problem, or a situation that faces this landowner because of the odd-shaped nature of the Chamorro Land Trust property. But it's something that can be fixed, in my opinion, without taking away and beginning the precedent of selling off Chamorro Land Trust property for the convenience of neighbors. It really is a convenience thing that we're doing here. It's not a necessary thing. It's just for the convenience of the developer, because it's so much easier for him to develop the property if his property was square. Is it impossible? No, it's not. So it's not a necessity, it's a convenience. And that's the other issue that is even, a greater disturbance to me, that we will set this precedent of severing Chamorro Land Trust property, selling it off to a non-eligible beneficiary for convenience sake, not for necessity's sake. And so we had proposed in discussions in the public hearing and so forth that, could they develop this with that portion of the property being a long-term lease? It can be, but it's not convenient to do so. And so there are alternatives to working with the landowner to ensure that he can make the best and highest use of his property without setting that precedent of taking property out of the Chamorro Land Trust and selling it off to non-eligible beneficiaries for just convenience sake. Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, I recognize Senator Frank Claus.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 112-31, and I rise in support for the sake of, I recognize the arguments that have been presented by the immediately retired Speaker, but I also recognize in as far as the value that was presented by the author of the legislation. You know, Madam Speaker, you know, with regards to the issue with regards to just what are we talking about here, and as far as the land, it's basically a slither of land. It's a piece that is, as was stated earlier, roughly about 1/10 the size of a basic house lot. It's a very minuscule portion. You know, when we talk about the concern, and I recognize the concern with regards to whatever precedents may be set with regards to the sale of this thing, but at the same token, I think that we need to view this in as far as a case-by-case basis. Let's also recognize the fact, as was stated, that this individual's property, the individual that wishes this body to be able to approve this piece of legislation so that he can square off his land, recognize too, Madam Speaker, that as was stated earlier, portions of his property were taken by the government for the expansion of a roadway. Let's also take into consideration, Madam Speaker, that this is not going to be sold basically at a value, you know, that is going to be set squarely by the individual who wishes to sell it or by this legislature. There's certain law, there's provisions that have been put in place that requires appraisals. So the amount this sliver of land is going to be sold is going to be based on an appraisal by an independent person, an independent body. So there's going to be monies that are going to be going into the land trust. There's also going to be monies that are going to be continued to derive, as was stated by the author of this legislation, in the taxes gained as a result of the activities that the individual who has this property wishes to put on it. So there is going to be that continuous long-term benefit to this. And so the point that I ask my colleagues to consider with regards to this legislation is, first off, the size of the land. It's landlocked. It's basically in the middle. There's nothing else that could be done to this piece of property. As the property standalone does not match any requirement or the necessary bounds for anything to be put there. It's going to be landlocked, and it is landlocked. Here's an opportunity for us to be able to gain some money from this in the front end and continue to gain in as far as the taxes that could be derived from the business activity that could go up as a result of the individual obtaining this piece of property. That said, too, Madam Speaker, this is just the authorization and everything. There's still that whole process with regards to being able to, whether the individual is going to purchase it or not. So I recognize, in as far as the concerns that were brought up by the retiring Speaker, some of the concerns that may be brought up with regards to the precedents, but I also recognize the piece of property, where it's at, the process of which it has to go through before it can be sold, and the benefits derived as a result of the sale of the property. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, I recognize Senator Chris Dueñas.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this Bill 112 and express my sentiments. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the legislation, understanding the caution of the previous speaker from Barragata, and understanding those concerns. The retiring speaker, I think, mentioned a number of issues that brought up a number of issues on how we can control that aspect going forward as well. The retiring speaker from Barrigada mentioned the issue of the severance of the lot. We can amend this bill to ensure that that is at the cost and at the direction of the beneficiary. Madam Speaker, I think sometimes, and once again, understanding the caution and the precedents and the issues surrounding that, I look at this particular issue and having gone through the public hearing and listened to the arguments, the one thing that came to mind, in my opinion, is sometimes we do things for the greater good. And in this instance, because of this individual requiring and requesting to do this, the individual has participated in our economy and will continue to participate in providing for opportunities to develop his business and to develop, the island. And as was mentioned once again by our other retiring speaker from Barrigada, the issue of there are sometimes injustices that a landowner would experience and feel when rights of way are expanded. So sometimes we can right a wrong. And sometimes we can do something for the greater good without setting a precedence, because it's confined to that. And it's confined to the understanding that in this instance, and I believe after having reviewed it, the greater good does prevail here. And I think the test of not wanting to set precedents is very real. But I think there's another test as well, and that is when we're talking about the public good. So in my opinion and in my feeling, Madam Speaker, that is why I've resolved that I can support this piece of legislation. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the motion, any other speakers? Senator Munya Barnes, you're recognized.
Anansi Zuas, Madam Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to just probably ask a couple of questions in reference to this bill, and if the author would like to yield.
Would you
Yes.
like to ask your
I
question?
just wanted to know that based on the public hearings and based on the number of times that this proposed legislation has gone through this August body, whether it be just through its introduction and going through public hearings, because if I'm not mistaken, this has come 2 or 3 times around before it's come into this August body. I'd like to ask the author of the legislation, at any time did the owner of Keystone who wants to purchase the property talk with Chamorro Land Trust in any offers of a long-term lease agreement on this property? Based on what has happened in history, past history?
Senator Toniata, do you yield to the question?
Yes, Madam Speaker. I believe with Chamorro Land Trust Properties, Mr. Monty Mofnis has stated that he's in support of the sale for that portion for the developer.
But at no time was there any talks about a long-term lease with Chamorro Land Trust on this?
Not to my knowledge.
And not even previously from this former?
Not to my knowledge. Whether the previous administrator of Chamorro Land Trust had any conversations with them or not, I have no knowledge of that.
Thank you very much, Madam.
You're welcome,
Speaker.
Senator. On the motion, is there anybody else who would like to speak on the motion?
Just a point of information, Madam Speaker.
Can
The
you please
chairman of the
state-
Chamorro Land Trust property stated that he did not favor the sale, and so the board itself did not.
Thank you for that information. Anybody else who would like to speak on the motion? There being none, I'd like to ask the author if you'd like to close. Okay. So on the motion then to send Bill 112-31 COR to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Substitute Bill number 138-31 LS. Let's see, one moment when I get the author. Recognize Senator Pangilinan on the bill.
Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move that Bill 138-31 LS is substituted by the Committee on Municipal Affairs, Tourism, Housing, and Recreation be placed in the third reading, and I'd like to discuss the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 138 is a bill that would expand and change the funding mechanism for the first-time homeowner relief program that had been in place within the government of Guam. The first-time homeowner program, Madam Speaker, was meant to assist young families or individuals who have not previously owned a home within the last 5 years to get them into their own home. It's the dream of every person who has a family or even without families of having something to call your own, not paying rent, but paying a mortgage. So in the end, you have something that you're tied to. You have an investment that you make to improve your position and capacity to provide for your family. Madam Speaker, even greater is when you take a look at what home ownership means to individuals, you'll find that most small businesses also depend on their home to be able to finance their business. That the equity in their home has gone into helping them start new businesses. So home ownership is not confined to just real estate, it's confined and tied to the economy of the small business owner across our country and certainly in our community. And so, Madam Speaker, what this does is it changes the existing program by changing the funding mechanism, number one, and then updating the cost of the home that qualifies for a first-time homeowner purchase. And what this does is, Madam Speaker, basically provides down payment assistance to somebody that is looking to purchase a home. That is one of the biggest impediments to home ownership. The two biggest impediments to home ownership for new families starting out is, one, consumer debt, their existing debts on credit cards and charge cards, and second is closing costs, and that's not so much anymore because of the fact that sometimes we have loan programs that allow you to finance that. And then, of course, finding the down payment. And even that changed over the years. But it's still the ability to qualify for the home because of consumer debt. And so this program, Madam Speaker, would provide homeowner assistance to a family looking to purchase their first home. And the also allows individuals who have been off island, going to school, coming back because of the residency requirements here to count the fact that they are residents of Guam going off island to school allows them to qualify for the program and not have to be physically present on Guam. But when they return, they're ready to make the investments in the community by purchasing a home. We can help and assist them. And that, of course, that they must occupy the home. So the program is not for the purchase of investment property, but the purchase of truly your first home. And so the program then sets a fairly extensive criteria for that. The home to be built shall not exceed $250,000 because we're looking for the segment of our community that is between those that would maybe qualify for public assistance, that don't qualify for public assistance, and those more well-established individuals. So we're looking for the starter, first-time family buyer, and so forth. So they're usually looking for their home, and we want to help the middle class, basically, Madam Speaker, and the young professionals just starting out, so that the home then can't be greater than $250,000 for the purchase of the home. And then there's a mechanism that allows the Guam Housing Corporation to to change that in the coming years as inflation creeps up and the cost of homes moves, so then they can, through board resolution and market surveys, increase that and not have to come back to the legislature. It sets the requirement for how you would apply for it, certificate of title, policy, purchase contracts, etc. The program, as in the past, will continue to be administered and run by the Guam Housing Corporation, which shall issue this certificate that now allows you to take that to the bank, and the bank can count that towards your down payment of this assistance that you will receive. And the amount of the assistance is 4% of the eligible transaction. So it'll be a maximum of 4% of the $250,000. So we're basically looking at approximately $5,000 of homeowner assistance. The program also would then allow the Guam Housing Corporation criteria, the ability to develop additional rules and regulations not covered by this in order to implement the program. The funding for the program would come from the profits that are currently generated by the operations of the Guam Housing Corporations in their mortgage and their rental departments. And so we're funding it at $500,000 a year. And this really helps because they fund a house, they fund a first-time homeowner. If the assistant comes from Guam Housing in their mortgage, they get a new mortgage, they get additional income stream to meet their operations. So it's self-generating in that respect. In addition, Madam Speaker, the bill also sets up something that we had discussions with the Guam Housing Corporation, a Housing Trust Fund Act. And this is a program that would allow Guam Housing Corporation to establish this Housing Trust Act that would allow them the ability to seek for additional capital for additional lending, over and beyond the ability to access the federal home mortgage loan bank system that we have across the country. Guam Housing generates income or generates mortgages through two sources. One, from the repayment of existing mortgages that they have lent out in the past. And second is they access capital for lending through the home loan bank system across the country. And this is, even though it sounds like it's a federal program, the Federal Home Loan Bank, it really is almost like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's actually, part of that conglomerate of almost quasi-government operations in which you become a member bank of this Federal Home Loan Bank system, and they will lend you money at a reduced rate, and you turn around and generate mortgages with a spread between what you would pay them and what you charge the mortgagee, and that's what you use for your operation. So that's one way. So the third way that we're allowing them is by expanding and putting in this program called a Housing Trust Fund program. And this would allow revenues generated by any program that this government passed, that this legislature passed, that would provide funding to this trust act, and then that trust would be the source of additional new mortgage capital for lending. So we are at this point setting up the house, so to speak, and the revenues to be deposited in this is still under discussion. So, but we are setting up the structure and the ability for Guam Housing to, one, set up this housing trust fund, seek additional outside sources to provide them the capital under the housing trust program, or at some point in the future, this government may consider to provide a funding source to the housing trust fund program. But at least at this time, it sets it up and it begins the process of setting up and the ability to look for opportunities there. And so, Madam Speaker, once again, I ask my colleagues to take a look at that. Section 4 of the bill, Madam Speaker, are almost technical changes to the Guam Housing Program and statutes that we looked at and worked with. We're allowing Guam Housing now to make 15 and 30-year loans. So that gives them the flexibility, and then allow them to a spread on the loan of 2%, and that's what really they use for their operations and additional mortgage. We also allowed a change in the 6% lending program because of the difference in the marketplace on loans right now, and this would allow them to deposit interest above 6% back into the Guam Housing Corporation Fund. And again, Madam Speaker, it allows for mortgages, not just 20-year mortgages, but allows for 15 and 30-year mortgages, which are the more conventional mortgage programs available, and allows them then to be able to offer the same type of amortization that the commercial banks offer clients who qualify for their programs, where in the past Guam Housing was limited to the 20-year mortgage program. And expanding it to the 30-year allows for greater number of people to qualify, and it relieves the mortgage burden versus the 20 years, and we give them, Guam Housing and the applicants, a choice of going 15 or 30 on these programs. So, Madam Speaker, I cannot emphasize, I think, the need for this government to try and find opportunities to help our young families and individuals looking to purchase their first home. If we're looking for economic stimulus, the economic collapse, let me retract that. The depressed economy that we're facing in the United States is created by a slump in the housing market first, and then financial institutions restructuring their lending practices to avert the slump in the housing market. So when the housing market started to slow down, the financial markets created these exotic collateralized mortgage obligations and other financial instruments to bolster the financial market. And the reason why I'm telling this is because it demonstrates and illustrates that stimulating housing, if you do it correctly and underwrite correctly, is the way for economic prosperity and economic stimulus in our country as well as in our community. And so while we have the opportunity in this time, before whatever happens with regards to any kind of expansion for military activity on Guam, that we provide opportunity for assistance to our local people to get financing to build their first homes before we begin to hit the time when the expansion will occur and prices increase through inflation, or the competition for labor to build these homes, because they're all looking at the opportunities to support military expansion instead of local expansion. And so, once again, Madam Speaker, this is a measured approach to helping our young families find that opportunity and realize achievement of that opportunity of home ownership. And so I ask my colleagues for their consideration of this bill, and most certainly ask for their support. Thank you, and Sidus Masi.
On the motion, I recognize Senator Tamada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the Bill 138. I think it certainly is a good program. However, I do have concern on regarding the eligibility criteria for applicants. And on page 11, paragraph 2 there, it makes provisions that, well, first of all, I'm not sure what this criteria means. An applicant for first-time homeowner assistant must be a natural person. And maybe if the author will yield and clarify that.
Senator, do you yield to the question?
Yes, it means a human being. Um, in law, a corporation is a person. So if you just say a person, then a corporation could qualify for this program. So when you say a natural person, it means it's a human being.
Okay, and I was looking in the definition section, and that that definition. This is the first time I've actually come across that term. So maybe it may be beneficial to define that term, natural person. And so I would ask that maybe legal counsel can provide that definition in the definition section. It certainly does not take anything away. The second item, which is probably my bigger concern, is the fact that the second eligibility criteria is that an applicant must be a United States citizen or permanent resident alien who is a resident of Guam. My understanding of a permanent resident alien is that that is an individual who is working towards U.S. citizenship but is not there yet. I guess there's still certain requirements that need to be satisfied. And the concern that I have here is I'm sure that the pot of money that's available to support this program is limited. And so does that mean then that a fully, a full U.S. citizen, maybe one of the former Guam residents who's coming back, who has decided now to relocate back to Guam and set up here, now has to compete with an individual who has not yet achieved their U.S. citizenship. And to me, that seems unfair. I would suggest that maybe an amendment to that might be that the applicant must be a U.S. citizen. However, in the event that demand for assistance by U.S. citizens have been satisfied, then permanent resident aliens who were residents of Guam may be considered for the program. So in other words, a fully certified U.S. citizen really should be given as preference to the program versus someone who has not yet achieved their U.S. citizenship. So with that, Madam Speaker, I would like to make the amendment on paragraph 2A. And I can write this out, but basically it would read, applicants must be a United States citizen, period.
On what
However,
page? What page is that?
this is on page 11,
11.
on line 4 and 5. So it would read that applicants must be a United States citizen, period. However, in the event that, I'm going to use the term, that demand for services by a U.S. citizen, by U.S. citizens have been satisfied, then permanent resident aliens who are residents of Guam may be considered for the program. So in other words, we will basically have two lists. A list which has all U.S. applicants who are U.S. citizens, and a second list of applicants who are permanent resident aliens. And so if we then exhaust the U.S. citizen list, then we go to the permanent resident alien list.
So we'll give you some time then to prepare your amendment. So take a brief recess.
That's the same way we're set up.
The legislature is back in session. Senator, I understand your amendment is ready.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The amendment has been passed out, and basically it would read on page 11, starting at line 4, it will read, applicant must be a United States citizen. However, period. However, in the event that demand by U.S. citizens have been satisfied, permanent resident aliens who are residents of Guam may be considered for the program. And that, Madam Speaker, is the amendment.
On the amendment, no objections to the amendment? So ordered. Amendment passed. Thank you. Senator, you still have the floor if you would like to continue to speak. Okay.
I'm done, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the motion, Senator Tina Rose Munya Barnes.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of Bill number 138-31, and I'd like to thank the author for giving me the opportunity to be a part of his co-sponsorship on this. And Madam Speaker, as Oversight Chair of Housing, I've continually noted that within the next decade, there's going to be an additional 6,000 houses that are going to be needed for our organic growth here within our community. And by the year ending 2030, there's going to be an additional 7,000 houses needed. And as we look at opportunities to give our residents and our working class families the resources and the tools it needs to provide for the quality of life for their children and for their families, to have their own home, to have a place where they can live, learn and educate and be a part with their families. What better way than to give them the resources that they need? We look at the impending population boom that is expected, that will still be expected with the military buildup. Construction and housing, housing and construction for housing is still going to be needed based on the information that I just gave you, just within this next decade coming. And we, as policymakers, got to stand ready to support programs that will open opportunities to provide for our people. I also want to say that the author of this legislation did include the opportunity of making sure that our first-time recipients for the housing be given that extra resources for down payments. And as noted here, Madam Speaker, I think that as we look at this trust fund that is being established, as we look at the program that was existing being changed to the first-time homeowners assistance program, we call this a win-win. We know that the Guam Housing Corporation and its organization supports the efforts of this and wants to see this legislation go through, as it gives more opportunity for more of our residents to apply and seek for new home ownership. So again, Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this Bill 138-31 LS, and I thank the author, Speaker Ben Pangilinan, and of course yourself, who is a part of the co-sponsorship, for giving me the opportunity to be the third co-sponsor. So, Situas Masi. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Munya Barnes. On the motion, Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand in full support of Bill 138-31, and I applaud the efforts. It's actually very reassuring and exciting as I read through all of the First-Time Homeowner Assistance Program Act. And as I listened to the author of the bill talk about a vision, talk about how rules and regulations will be developed as we go on, I'm very hopeful that as this initiative develops and grows, that there will come a time when there will be specific mention of homeownership assistance specifically set aside for an integrated living community for those of us with disabilities. Regardless of whether there is a military buildup or the time of when this military buildup is going to really come upon us and impact our roadways and our sound systems, we already know that those of us with disabilities are already here. And the home situation, the housing situation, there is a great need for that. And so we too need assistance in that area. And so I also had that question about a natural person, so that question had already been answered. So Madam Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to fully support an initiative that I think will provide opportunities for more of our people, and that shall include all people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, I recognize Senator Guthertz.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to support this bill, and I want to commend the author and the co-authors. I'd like to join them as one of the sponsors. The bill is very important because it will provide opportunities to folks, hopefully, to get into homes. And I think the Guam Housing Corporation has needed some support from this legislature over the last few years to help jumpstart more housing programs sponsored by their organization. You know, they're holding on to millions of dollars, Madam Speaker, one of the few instrumentalities of the government of Guam that actually has money in the bank to loan for housing. And I think this program is going to help jumpstart that process. And also, it will help give life to our real property industry on Guam. There's no question that the realtors on the island right now are going through a very difficult period, just like many in the private sector. And if this government can sponsor programs to help boost the economy as well as home ownership at the same time, I think that this would be an excellent way to do it. I do have one question for the sponsor, though. Maybe he can help me out.
One moment, Senator Pangilinan, there's going to be a question for you. So, Senator, you may proceed with your questioning.
Yeah.
Please proceed. Go ahead and ask your
Thank
question.
you, Madam Speaker. My question is very simple. I just want to know if the sponsor believes, and I sure hope he does, that this bill will also help our private sector, particularly our real estate industry, in different ways. One is perhaps in assisting the realtors on the island help their clients obtain financing for home purchases, and also to encourage the development of additional housing projects on the island, wherein the buyers might be able to afford to purchase homes in new subdivisions that would be sponsored through the Guam Housing Corporation. So if our sponsor could please help address those two items. One is, how will this help or influence the improvement in real property sales on the island? And number two, would this some way help private developers be willing to invest money in building new subdivisions wherein the buyers might qualify for this program? Thank
Senator,
you.
do you yield to the question? Unless you want to take a recess?
Question is yes.
To both questions? Yes. Yes and yes.
Great. So I hope our realtors out there are listening, that here's a program that, if it becomes law, will help you find financing for eligible house hunters on the island. And secondly, for those who are developers, that here's a program that might help you be interested in developing your projects, your housing projects, because you might be able to get financing to support buyers. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, would anyone like to speak on Bill number 138? There being none, I'd like to recognize then the author to close on Bill 138.
Thank you, Ensidusmasi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for their consideration on this bill that I'm presenting before this body. I certainly want to continue the efforts that we've had in the past. We actually did have this program operating at one time. There were some, maybe I would say, non-support by certain administrations for not funding the program after a certain time, and it just kind of laid there. And so this gave us an opportunity to then reevaluate the program. And we do know that the program was successful. The program did provide first-time homeowner assistance to young families seeking homes and to purchase their home. And then we needed to find another mechanism to continue funding the program. And then, of course, we needed to upgrade the amount of the home that would need to qualify. When we introduced the program, and this was something I did back in, I think, the 24th Guam Legislature, it might have been. I think we said that the homeowner, the home price was, I think, $135,000. And then we saw that that wasn't sufficient anymore to be given the increase in the price of the median price of homes on Guam. And so that then became part of the reevaluation of the program and so forth. So, Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues and certainly ask for their support and their vote. And I also want to add then Senator Judy Guthrie to make a motion to add her to be the fourth co-sponsor on the bill.
On that amendment, without any objections, order. So on the motion to send then Bill 138 to third reading file without any objections, order. On amended bill number 207-31, I recognize the author. 207, Senator, let me see, get the
Thank
name.
you.
Okay, I'm looking for you there. Okay, Senator, yes, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 207-31, as amended by the Committee on Appropriation, Taxation, Public Debt, Banking, Insurance, Retirement, and Land. I would like to move that the bill be placed in the third reading file, and I'd like to discuss it briefly.
You may, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to also make a motion first that I add Senator Frank Bloss as the second co-sponsor on the bill.
On that motion, without any objections, order.
And of course, Madam Speaker, I want to express my appreciation for Senator Bloss for helping us bring this piece of legislation to the floor. Madam Speaker, the bill would authorize land management to exchange a portion of the Agana Fractional Lot Program with Mr. and Mrs. Adrian Cristobal and his wife, Conception F. Cristobal, that is made necessary based upon a land exchange that was authorized back in, I think, the early 70s by this legislative body. The Cristobals had property where the Tamuning Fire Station and LBJ Elementary School sit today. And that property was taken from the Cristobals for that public purpose. And in exchange, the Cristobals were granted a land exchange. And the land exchange that Mr. and Mrs. Cristobal were given was an EPAN. And when they moved to do the land exchange, and the government did, and consummated the land exchange, it was discovered, and the owner of the property that the Cristobals were given in EPAN, when he found out about it, sued the government of Guam because the property that they were given was not government property, it was private property. And so the landowner sued the government of Guam and the Cristobals, and the property was returned back to the Paulinos in that case, who owned that property. And the judgment, as part of the judgment, was that the Cristobals were given the right, as part of the judgment, to choose the piece of property that that was government owned, for them to exchange for LBJ and the Tamuning Fire Station. And this kind of continued to languish. Sometimes the Cristobal chose one, government wasn't willing, and so forth. And so what we've done in this bill is that the Cristobals have an Agana piece of property, and the Agana piece of property is abutting part of the Agana fractional lot program. And what the Cristobals then finally agreed to is that they will take that property that abuts their land in Agana and consolidate it with their small property and give them a usable size property here in Agana in exchange, and settle the outstanding land exchange in the court judgment. And this actually works well for the government of Guam, because when the Cristobals were given the EPAN property, I think it was like 3 acres or something like that. Now they're settling for an Agana lot abutting their lot that is somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple hundred square meters. So we are saving some property in that. The property is, when the Chamorro Land Trust, the complications that occur is when the Chamorro Land Trust was passed, the Agana fractional lot program, although had been in statute as existing to settle the Agana fractional lot program, that was a reserve purpose, it was still put into the Chamorro Land Trust. And so what this bill does is now the property that the Chamorro Land Trust has will be used to abut the Cristobal property, and then the government of Guam will replace that property that was taken out of the Chamorro Land Trust and put property that is indebted of, slated for land exchange, back into the inventory of the Chamorro Land Trust. This also moves forward the plan for the construction of the Department of Land Management building, because the land management building is slated to be built next to the Cristobal property, and this provided a sliver into the basic lot of the Chamorro Land Trust. So this just squares up the Chamorro Land Trust. Again, Madam Speaker, we're doing this for a public purpose, and that is for the construction of the Chamorro Land Trust to settle the government debt on the land exchange for the Cristobals, but we are still maintaining the inventory of Chamorro Land Trust by replacing it with Gov Guam land scheduled for that. And so, Madam Speaker, this solves 3 problems that were faced with regards to settling outstanding government obligation, constructing the Department of Land Management to be built on the Chamorro Land Trust property down in Agana, and then it would move forward and the Chamorro Land Trust property will become a landlord to the Department of Land Management. And so, but most importantly, Madam Speaker, it also gives us an opportunity that the Cristobals were willing to work with us in terms of the Agana fractional lot program and consolidate that lot, and then we don't have to give up 10, 20 acres really for the exchange in other government land. And so this would complete that, and I thank my colleagues and ask for their favorable consideration.
On the motion, so Senator Pangilinan, would you like to move it down then, or would you like to say anything else more? I guess not. So then on the motion then to send Bill 207 to third reading file without any objections and no other speakers, so ordered. Substitute Bill number 239-31 COI. Recognize the author, Senator Mabini.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to move to accept the approved substitute Bill 239-31 by the committee, as substituted by the Committee on Education and Public Libraries, to be placed to the third reading file, and I'd like to briefly discuss the bill. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to just point out, I believe there was perhaps an exclusion of another sponsor from the original substitute
Yes,
bill.
we've instructed already the clerk
Thank
to
you.
make sure that that's done.
Thank you very much. You know, Bill number 239-31 has been a long journey for me in the making. This stems from work that I have been involved in since my days with community colleges and working with curriculum folks, addressing issues about, you know, why or what could we do to continue helping our students succeed. I'd like to point out that a lot of work has been happening or has happened from the various agencies to make this happen. And, you know, on the bill, on page 1, you'll clearly see that, you know, I give credit to the Guam Department of Education through their efforts in their district action plan. They're addressing this need to, you know, to improve our students' success. They want to line 9, they want to emphasize both academic courses and career technical studies to prepare students for broad career fields and higher education. And let's face it, when a student graduates from high school, their goal hopefully is not to return back home and stay with mom and dad. It's to lead successful independent lives, to find jobs, to go to college or whatnot. So I believe that this bill is a step forward to trying to address to address the changes that we need to make in order to help support their needs. On the front of the bill, on the first page, I point out again that currently the district action plan, which by the way they're working on updating, there's 3 main things that they want to do. They want to increase achievement and application. They want to blend so that our students are both prepared for college and careers. And the third most important point is they want to advance state and local policies. And this is where Bill 239 comes in. Madam Speaker and my colleagues, I've worked with a task force since the beginning of my term as a new senator, and this task force consists of our career technical education task force consists of people both from the university, the private sector, and most importantly, the Department of Education curriculum leaders. And they support this endeavor and the goals of this particular bill. I'd like to hand out, and this is the teacher coming out in me as well as, so please indulge me. I'll be handing out a few handouts just so that you can see quickly the basis of some of my arguments. And some of you may have seen this in previous in front of you. I'll give just a few minutes for it to be passed around. In front of you is a handout that I marked A at the front, and this was one of the catalysts as well to move for the development of this bill, and it was basically remarks from our federal U.S. Department of Education Secretary Duncan. And I just kind of highlighted and made some notes, and this is just for your notes. I don't want to use this time to review it, but some of the key things that I wanted to point out, and I believe it's like, let's see, on the right hand, there's a little note where it says eliminate the dual track at Guam DOE. I highlighted something that really jumped out at me. CTE students also must have academic skills to be able to engage in post-secondary education and training without the need for remediation, which we know has been a constant challenge over at Guam Community College in Yogi. And to strengthen these programs, there should never be an excuse for reducing rigor and tracking students away from pursuing their college degree. This is an important letter, and I hope you will take time after, maybe during or rather after the session, to read what Secretary Duncan and Assistant Secretaries of Education are calling out. Another handout that I wanted to give, and this one I thought would be interesting for most of us, because a lot of us like to try to make decisions for our education system, which I think is sometimes can be unfair to them, but for the most part, I think for us educators and for all of us professionals here, we all want to kind of guide our decisions based on some data. And I thought this would probably be the most compelling piece of data that I'd like to share again. And if everybody has in their hands a copy of this material. This one was prepared by by the International Center for Leadership in Education. They work with our governors, our state board of educations, our state Department of Educations, even major foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And this is just really interesting. If you look at the front page, or where it says B, you'll notice that the career clusters, and for some of us who may not be familiar with Lexile, they do a measurement of what kind of reading skills our students need or our graduates need. At the top are just numbers, and they may not mean anything to you right now. But if you flip the page over to the back, where it has this column, this grid, you will see that based on their national studies, what we're preparing if you look at the first two left-hand columns, first left-hand column shows what high school students are generally scoring at. The second column says this is what our high school curriculum looks like. Now, interestingly, look at the last three. These are the levels of reading that our students need to be at to be successful in whether they're personal reading, whether reading newspapers, whether entering careers. If we want them to go into education and training, they're falling at a much higher Lexile. If you want them to go into architecture and construction, we want them to get into any of these careers that we want them to be successful here on Guam. If there's a big disparity, obviously, from this grid. That's why I wanted to hand this out, because Bill 239 will begin addressing how to start erasing those gaps where we can prepare our students and align them to what they really are needing when they step out of high school. Finally, Bill 239, which is why I'm standing up here for. On page 2 of Bill 239, I want to point out, again, the statement that the Secretary of Education had mentioned, and that's line 13. This must, as far as our curriculum, line 12, it is the responsibility of our educators to prepare all students for both college and career. And this must be both and not either an or. And it's time to finish this transformation of the old vocational education system into the new CTE. And this is all in conjunction with what DOE's district action plan is and their goals. But how do we get there? That's the hard part. And then it was during this process that I realized that one of the barriers to the change has to do with what sits in our existing laws, our existing GCA. And my final handout that I'd like to point out, and this was provided to me by the curriculum instruction director. And our educators here are familiar with it. This is what the bill is all about. If you look at this handout, this is what, any of you have any high school students, nieces, nephews, daughters, cousins, friends, neighbors, high school students, this is what their expectation, this is what they need in order to graduate. Now they have to choose between two tracks. If I was a student today, I would have to choose between, do I want a career track, which is the left-hand column, or career track? This legislation and the agenda for today in this bill is, it shouldn't be that discussion, because if you look at I believe I may have highlighted your copies, on the career prep side, students who choose that only get to take, are required to take 3 years of social studies, 3 years of math, and 3 years of science. And if we have remedial problems occurring, this may be one of them. Now, that's not to say that they're not taking extra math classes that are application-based, like they have math that they could use in culinary arts or whatnot. But the point being is this should not happen. We should not have a dual existing curriculum track. We should have one single rigor and relevant course. I know this is going to take a lot of work, and that's why on page 3, you'll see that there are, or excuse me, the last page, that there's steps to be taken so that we don't make this such a hard and difficult task for Department of Education, because we know that they are doing a lot of good work, but they need time. So this bill will actually ask that that the board will work together with key stakeholders in our community, including the Workforce Investment Board, including maybe GITA, including this superintendent, to create a strategic plan on how can they start blending this curriculum and to implement it in school year 2014-2015, or maybe even sooner. Last but not least, the last page again at the top, the intent of this is, one, we want to increase student academic achievement and graduation rates. We want to prepare them to make good choices relative to their employment and educational experience. We want to raise their aspirations. We want all of us to be part of this formula. And one of this is fairly simple. And I'm asking all of my colleagues to join me to be the change agents today to make this change. This is why I ran for senator, and I hope that we'll be able to get this as a Christmas gift and a New Year's endeavor for our students and for our community. So I seek the support of all my colleagues. Sijus Masi.
You're welcome, Senator Mabini. I have the Vice Speaker next.
Merry Christmas, Senator Mabini. I rise in support of this bill. I hope that the rest of our colleagues will join us in supporting this. I am especially supportive of the last section in this bill that talks about the implementation of a state plan. I really think it's imperative that all of our educational institutions get together and decide where we're going. I understand that the governor has flown to Japan and the lieutenant governor has flown to Japan in an effort to try to attract businesses to Guam. And I know Pt.1 had a couple of weekends ago had a question about how do we improve economic development. And I know my staff were a little concerned about my comments that I wanted to make, was that it's imperative that we address the education and the training of our students. I'm not talking necessarily just about education at the university in academics, in accounting, or in economics. But I'm also talking about the fact that GCC has to step up to the plate and address the needs for the vocational training that is necessary and the training that we need to be able to attract people here. If we look around the community and we try to figure out what businesses on this island have more than 100 employees, we'll be able to put in a couple of them. One of the largest employers on the island used to be Continental. And I say used to be because I'm not sure what's happening to them, because the flight attendants are now being all disbanded. But the one thing that Continental does have, and the local Continental did have, was an excellent group of mechanics. I know that because my godson went to Arizona or Texas to learn how to be a mechanic, and I know that right now, I think maybe today or tomorrow, a bunch of the Continental mechanics are being flown down to Vietnam because they're being used to try to augment United's mechanical needs throughout the Pacific and the region. So I know we're training, we have excellent mechanics up there. But the thing is that if we want to do other kinds of industries on this island, unless it's only the owner that's going to make money and it's going to be the H2 laborers that are going to make money, we've got to train the requisite workforce. At one point, we thought we were going to have a great ship repair industry on this island. I was shocked to find out that most of the employees at the shipyard are H-2 laborers now. There aren't sufficient number of welders that are being trained up at GCC or the Trades Academy or wherever to fill these positions. How are we going to benefit? Well, how's the community going to benefit from this? Sure, the owner of shipyard is making hands over fist money, but and he's paying some taxes, and he's assisting in the community. But the thing is that we need employees there that are going to be making reasonable living wages, but we need to have them trained. Someone has to sit down and figure out the inventory if we want to have the attract industry to this island. We've had as the basic industry of this island tourism for the last 40 years. But as of this year, 40 years after we established tourism on this island, and 40 years after we've been inviting and receiving almost 1 million Japanese tourists a year, Department of Labor is still, to this day, 2011, approving H-2 labor certifications to bring in Japanese-speaking waiters, Japanese-speaking maitre d's for the hotels. What is happening to the tourism industry, tourism program up at the university? Why don't we have sufficient number of Japanese speakers who are proficient? We've had 40 years to prepare to work on this. The community is up in arms, and it's touting the fact that our savior is going to be the China visa waiver. Yesterday at the commencement, maybe Senator Ben will tell us how many students graduated with a degree with Chinese. Or even if there is a curriculum teaching Chinese up at the university. Or whether or not there is a curriculum at the university, since it's been approved that we're going to get the Russians here. Is there a Russian language program up at the university? No, we're going to have H-2 laborers brought in for all that. The savior that we thought we were going to have with the China visa waiver, we've not prepared our workforce to be able to address it. I know that we're going to have Chinese finally starting in the high schools, and I want to thank Senator Tony Adam for inviting those individuals from the Chinese community to come and bring some young Chamorro that has learned Chinese and been living in Beijing to come home and try to put a program together up in the public school system. But we've got to be able to prepare our workforce, otherwise we'll keep going out inviting people to come, and they're not going to come to establish here because we don't have the requisite workforce, whether it's welders, whether it's language speakers, or we don't have sufficient number. I mean, I know all of you are getting tired of my constantly harping on the H-2 alien labor thing, but if you look at the list of people that are being brought in, the huge numbers of them, they're not vocations or that are impossible for our young people to do. I know we have some people that are doing them, but we don't have sufficient numbers. If we have mechanics that can fix airplanes and are being flown to Vietnam so they can take care of planes, then we have brilliant young mechanics here. Why is it that we're still bringing in H-2 laborers for hydraulic mechanics and for even auto mechanics? Madam Speaker, I know that there's a time I just wanted to rise and say that I support this. It unfortunately only addresses really just the K through 12. At some point, maybe, since I'm not an educator and everybody keeps saying you don't understand education, those of you with your degrees will assist me in trying to figure out a way that we can get GCC and UOG to finally do an inventory of what is needed in this community to expand and to address what we want. I mean, if we wanted to have, I was reading Bill Clinton's book on the new economy, and I was surprised that the one thing that is absolutely necessary is improving the infrastructure. And the one infrastructure that he says is imperative for the 21st century is broadband. And I was shocked to hear that broadband in Korea is 4 times faster than any that we have in the United States. 4 times faster. If we want to be the telecommunications center of the Pacific, if we want to be able to be the office center of the Pacific even, we're producing enough accountants up at the university, yeah, and all kinds of other technocrats. I noticed that. Johnson Control just came, and it's one of the largest Fortune 400 companies. They've hired a number of local people. We're producing, and we can produce bureaucrats and technocrats, but we need to have the people that can do the work, that are going to be out there and put in the LEDs, the solar panels, and that are necessary. I've been almost blue in my face talking to members of the CCU about the fact that solar panels, and we should have had this. I know Governor Ricky and I were teased as being Don Quixote and Sancho Panza when we were trying to push windmills and solar energy. Oh, it can't produce 24/7. In Germany, which has as much sun as London, and God knows how pasty those people are because they don't have sun, Germany is now the #1 producer of solar panels and photovoltaic batteries because it established the industry. It established and was able to employ 300,000 new employees. That's why the president was talking about green energy. Bill Clinton figures that if we did it in the United States, we'd be able to get over 1 million employees, people employed just in that one industry. If we want to do that, and I spoke to some people, and I'm hoping that the Talafofo project goes through soon, and that the GCC one goes through so we can train people to be able to go into this industry, we've got to address what is needed for the 21st century, Madam Speaker. The university has done an excellent job in preparing educators and government officials. They've been presidents and governors and of all the jurisdictions in the Pacific, and I commend them for the work that they've done in that area. But now it's the 21st century, and we've got to prepare the workforce. We can't all be chiefs. We've got to find some Indians that are going to be down there doing the work that is necessary to bring us into the 21st century. And I think this bill is a good first step forward, and I rise in support.
Thank you very much, Vice Speaker. On the motion, I recognize Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too stand in full support of Bill number 239-31, and when the author of this measure had first started crafting and researching, and as she invited some of us to the table, I didn't go to that table. And I didn't go to that table because I am absolutely frustrated at the efforts that we have been trying to implement since 1985. Madam Speaker, you'll clearly remember 1985, those of us who are at the Department of Education had worked on the Blueprint for Excellence. As the previous speaker had talked about workforce development, that has been high on our list at the department about how are we going to define workforce development and what are we going to actually do about it. And so for decades, we had groups of people, call them task force, call them think tanks, call them subcommittees. We had all sorts of committees coming together and saying this is what we needed to do, and this is how we need to get there. So in 1985, we had the Blueprint for Excellence. In 1995, we had alternative learning paths. We also had the Power of Work in the mid-90s, and it was really exciting. And we had many aspects of our career technical ideas being defined at that time. We even have had the legislature sponsor major legislation that would say that in the community, if you are a community partner, you'll get some tax breaks. And that was all very exciting. We had bits and pieces of people coming and saying this is what we're going to do, but we never, Mr. Vice Speaker, had everybody at the table at the same time. And I suggest that is why it has never happened. I think that we all understand that we need to get with it, and we need to be serious about developing our workforce development. But we have never had genuine collaboration across the three branches, across our island community. Everyone to varying degrees says they're excited, wants to do it, but they don't deliver. I struggle often because I get my share of emails or face-to-face conversations with current board members about what is the fine line between legislation and board policy. Just last week I said to some Department of Education people that I clearly remember what it's like to be in their shoes and then to receive a mandate from the Guam Legislature. And when we receive mandates, then we have to sit down again and figure out how we're going to do everything. And more often than not, we ignore mandates. And the biggest excuse for ignoring a mandate is that it's an unfunded mandate. And so, oh well, how can we expect to do it? I think there's a real need for conversation between the Guam Legislature and the Board of Education Policy Board to identify who's going to do what and how we're going to do it. I certainly believe that the Education Board members are very concerned and very serious about their mission of crafting and being stewards of policy that shall take every single child into the 21st century and be prepared for the world of work, whether that is as going on to higher education or not. But I think that fine line needs to be defined. Now, certainly, Senator, the author of this legislation has had conversations with the board. It's all in the committee report. And I appreciate that our timeline has pushed back to 2015, I believe. Yes, because it's going to take that long to have everyone come to the table again and decide what kind of career interest inventory we're going to take, where's that money going to come from, what kind of training are we going to do, who are the guidance counselors going to take it, when will the inventories arrive, at what time of the school year are we going to do the inventory, who are the teachers that are going to decide that what kind of programming is going to support this. And I agree with the previous speaker in that we have very excellent teachers in our workforce. But what we do lack is guidance. What we do lack is a structure that tells us this is how we're going to prepare all kids for all students for life, promote excellence, and provide support. We don't have that. We have a very fragmented system right now, and it is not for lack of money. I also want to suggest that, and again, the author of this legislation talks about the need to work with the School of Education at the University of Guam, or perhaps it's the University of Guam. But I, like the previous speaker, want to talk a little bit about the School of Ed. And while our Vice Speaker was very kind in talking about the preparation of our teachers of today, I am suggesting that is way past due time to reformulate the School of Education Teacher Preparation Program. We are not preparing teachers who are equipped to work with all students. We are not preparing teachers to infuse technology into the classrooms. We have more and more teachers who are real happy if families don't show up on the campuses, believe me. And there are more of us who are identified as difficult parents. And when they see us, they all try to walk around the other corner. So, and I've said this before publicly, every time someone says it's family involvement that keeps our student achievement down, I become very angry about that because there are many families who are very involved. But we are not with our child throughout the school day, and we are not the only ones teaching our children. Our teacher preparation program has to be re-examined, has to be reformulated, so that every single teacher is well equipped to teach our children so that they are prepared for the 21st century and the 31st century. So that they can come together and know what this vision of workforce development looks like. The author of this legislation has also described Board Policy 351-4. And as I looked at it, when I was the Associate Superintendent of Curriculum, we had actually minimized the credits required because at that time we understood the importance of getting every single student into the neighborhood, into the community classroom. Because that's where, at that time, the top choice for our students was construction. Before that, the top choice of our student career was fine arts. And I really believe it's a function of what's going on in our environment that gets our kids excited about studying, about learning, about graduating, and about earning a living. So the legislators at that time worked with us, and they said any business out there that will be a community classroom, that will be job coaches, that will welcome our teachers and our students will get a tax break. But that fell through because we weren't cohesive enough. We didn't have all the branches coming together saying that this is the way we shall build our island, our Guam, our workforce development so that we shall prevail. I also suggest, as we spend a lot of time talking about reading, and it is very important, I suggest that health is even more important these days. We talk about abuse rates, we talk about family communications and family relationships. I would like to ensure that that our teachers, that our families are well equipped in how to raise healthy children. Because I may know how to write, and I may know how to read. Sometimes I even know how to calculate. But when I have a migraine, or when my tummy is upside down, it doesn't matter. When my son is spiraling into a meltdown, it doesn't matter. Our health is so critical. And to our board policy, the notion of integration has to occur. There's lots of conversations across our school campuses right now about a piece of legislation that our 31st Guam Legislature adopted, and that was to heighten the amount of credits for the Chamorro curriculum in our high schools. And right now they are all figuring out how to do it. And I suggest to the curriculum people, they need to infuse it. Teach Chamorro through the arts, teach Chamorro through literature, teach Chamorro through social studies and language arts. It's the only, you're not going, unless we extend the school day, you're not going to find any more time in that school day. And then let us be prepared to pay our teachers more. That's the way it works. But there are always answers. But Mr. Vice Speaker, workforce development is key. Preparation, competencies, skills, in partnership with our private sector, our preparation programs at GCC and UOG. I agree with you totally. We must all come together and be serious about it. We keep doing the same mode, we're going to get the same mode, and that's just the way it works. We want to break these barriers. We want to provide a brighter, better future so that we can buy our homes and secure our homes and sustain our homes, as we've been talking about earlier, so that we become healthy and happy and build a future for the rest of Guam. And so I do stand in full support of 239-31. I do suggest that all of Guam has to come together and be serious about it. No more talk. Let's start acting. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamashita. Dr. Senator Guthridge.
I think the retiring speaker was quite eloquent in summarizing the challenges ahead of us in education at all levels. And I support her comments, and I'm very pleased to be a co-sponsor of this bill, Mr. Speaker. You know, there are a few of us in this room that have dedicated our lives to education on our island. Some at the public school level, including our dear speaker. Some at the community college level, including the sponsor of the bill. And some of us at the university level, including myself and also Dr. Yamashita. We also are very fortunate to have two individuals in this hall that have served as high-level administrators at the Department of Education, including our speaker and including Dr. Yamashita. So there's a lot of knowledge in this room. And I think the challenge is to answer the question, have we kept up with the changing world at our university, at our community college, and in our public school system? And I think, as you pointed out earlier, Mr. Speaker, in some ways we have not. And it's time for some changes. And this bill will kickstart these changes from a policy perspective. You know, in other jurisdictions of the United States, state legislatures are very active in establishing policies to help guide the kind of education we would like to see our young people have. And the reason is the policy makers represent the community at large. They see a bigger picture than those folks sitting on the Board of Education or on the Board of Regents or on the Board of Trustees of a community college. You know, the area now of great interest is certification, professional certifications, both in the skill areas and in the academic areas. In some ways, professional certifications are more valuable than academic degrees. I'm very pleased, Mr. Speaker, that both the School of Business up at the university and even the College of Education to some extent now are moving in the direction of professional certifications in addition to the academic degrees that they are offering. This should also be an option. If someone doesn't want to go for an academic degree, they should be able to go for a professional certification, whether in the skills area or in the academic arena. And I think this bill is going to help us move in that direction. You know, what's interesting is we have wonderful talent on our island. We just saw 291 young people graduate yesterday, inspired by our former speaker's keynote address, from the University of Guam. 291. And they come from all walks of life. Single people, married people, single mothers, veterans, individuals that work and go to school part-time at the university, foreign students, students from the States that have come to the University of Guam. All kinds of folks graduated yesterday. And they have dreams and they have hopes, and they should have dreams and hopes. But the people of Guam have hopes too, and I think what the people of Guam hope for is having a well-educated workforce at all levels and for all institutions and all industries on the island that are flexible and can deal with change. For those of us that have taught in the classroom and occasionally still teach in the classroom, the message is to the students today, you must be flexible. You must be able to deal with change. You must learn new things. You must be able to adapt to what is happening in the economy and what is happening in the institutions of society. Because if you're not change-oriented and you're not adaptable to change, you will not survive in today's workplace. You can't keep doing the same things forever in the workplace. That doesn't work anymore. Employers are looking for folks that are adaptable to change, that can move when they need to move into new areas and learn new things and be willing to take on responsibilities that may not be in their job description on behalf of their organizations. And our educational institutions, aside from the skills and the academic training that they provide, must prepare our students to be change agents and to be able to adapt to change. Now, this bill is part of that equation. It introduces a change of thinking, and it also gives a message to our educational institutions that we're watching what they're doing. And the people of Guam are watching what they're doing. And they want to see some changes. And I think this is a great beginning from policy direction to let the institutions know that, hey, we want you to consider this, we want you to start looking at this seriously and to start proposing these kind of changes. because we are using public funds to fund these institutions. And we have a responsibility to ensure that those funds generate the best of all outcomes on behalf of the people of Guam. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Guthers. Dr. Wampat, Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on Bill 239. I'd like to, first of all, of course, thank the author, not just for introducing the bill, but for her patience, because I know she had introduced this in June, and it's taken us up to this time to actually place it on the agenda. And I thank her for her patience, for her and her staff and my staff to work on this, and to also work with the Department of Education and GCC. And although I know earlier there may be some members who originally may not be in favor of this bill because they're thinking of the other spectrum of students maybe that this may not address. And I like to talk about that a little bit to assure, of course, some of our members who may be thinking that way and not wanting to support the bill, and why I think it's important that they reconsider it. This bill actually, I think, is really on the right track. And I say that primarily because, and I'm going to go back in history and how education has evolved and how, we've been teaching our children. Very well, we started out with the one schoolhouse. We then started to have a one-track system in which we were able to teach our children. And then early on, of course, in my schooling, then we developed, and also as an administrator of the schools, we went into a 3-path, and then we went into a 2-track again now, and here we are on this 1-track. And many times you hear educators say this as well about our children, is that do we want to then maybe have one path in the sense, though, that then without considering the children in the other spectrum that may need some remedial courses? But then you always hear educators say is that we should not be dumbing down our curriculum. We should not be dumbing down our tests. We should not just dumb down education as well, but rather we should be setting certain standards, certain expectations of our children, and then we help our children rise to that expectation. And to some, maybe others might say, well, that really is idealistic and it may not really work. But what this bill is doing is getting this train back into the track again, hopefully then to fulfill what on page, if you look on page 4, exactly what it is that the bill hopes to address. And that's where increasing student academic achievement, graduation rates, preparing our children, and so forth. So I think we are on the right track. When we make changes, and educators make all these changes, a lot of times we say, yes, that's the buzzword of the time. That's exactly what's happening in the United States or here in Guam. That's what's happening in the world of work. And if you look at the list, the career cluster list, is that when you look at what now we're looking for from our students. And I don't want to think that, of course, whatever the list is, that will be the top priority wherever, for all places, because we're going to need to make adjustments accordingly and based on the place. And I agree with, one of our earlier speakers that said, and for me, that health, yes, is the frontline issue. And that has been an issue with WHO. It's an issue primarily for us in the Pacific because of the reports in terms of where the largest people are from, and they're saying it's in the Pacific Islands, and it's a real big issue, an important issue for every one of us. I'd like to also discuss, if I may, some portions of the bill that really hits home for me. And that is on page 2, where it talks about, and on line 17, the integration, to integrate academic subjects and career and technical education. And I agree with the earlier speaker that rather than trying to extend our school days, that's exactly what we need to do with all of our courses, is that we need to integrate our subjects, integrate our disciplines. And by doing so, I think would then knock out that argument where our children would say that this particular subject that they're taking has nothing to do with them in preparing them for the world of work, that it is boring, why do I need this? You know, whatever their arguments are, if we start to integrate our disciplines, I think we'll be able then to kill that particular argument or excuse that is being given by anyone for that matter as to why then I have to take this course or that particular course. And I know I may be jumping around here, but just please bear with me. On the next page, when it talks about our public school children in the elementary middle school, and I've been always in the middle school, and in the middle schools, usually we would like to try to be able to prepare our students. We want them to start thinking now about a career. So then what would be best in this case, of course, is to give these children at that age group already a career inventory test, whether you give it in the 8th grade or you give it in the 9th grade. But it has to be given. And that then you provide then your programs based on the needs of and interests of our students. And you've got to be able, and since we don't know what they are, then you're going to need to be able to provide like a career awareness program or exploratory courses. And exploratory courses, I remembered in the 8th grade in the middle school at one time, is that we had what we call these quarter courses, and they were exploratory courses at that time, but they were offered for a quarter. And those quarter courses at that time, of course, and for some of you may say that I've been in the system for too long and already, that it was actually, the courses consisted of agriculture, 1/4 of agriculture. And then you go back to the career cluster, and what do you see on top of the list? Agriculture, natural resources. Well, we don't offer that anymore, but now you look at the list, that's on the top of the list. Another thing that we offered at the time in the school system when I was in is home economics, because we want to be able to help our children also have these basic skills to be able to take care of basic things that they would need to know. Sewing and cooking, mending any, buttons or a hem or a cut or a tear, in our clothing. But that's no longer offered again. Maybe one school, I think, might still offer it. Industrial arts, which is woodworking and metal shop, was also offered. I've seen in our schools really great shop classes that has just been torn down now because the new thing to go into, yes, was computer science, teaching our children how to use a keyboard. And then the last thing was career education, to say then, and career awareness day or career day that used to take place in all the middle schools. You rarely see now. You see some high schools actually doing it for one day. It's a change of the times, and I understand, of course, when we go through all this, that we are making changes of all accordingly, and the place to do it always has been in education. Then when there is, and then of course we cut out industrial arts, but then you look at the second list, what's the highest request or demand in our community? Architecture and construction. But you don't see that in the schools anymore and that's supposed to be an exploratory course. Now the third will be arts, and guess what? Whenever there is a shortage of funds, where's the first place we want to cut? In the arts, in music and art classes, in band. So we don't offer it, and we used to offer it to all of our students. Every child used to have an opportunity to explore the possibility of learning to play even these recorders. You don't see that anymore. Now it's that you find students who have been playing for so many years, and then therefore it said, okay, then you're the best candidate then to take, a band class. It used to be that our students would all go into general music, and you'll be exposed to learning how to read notes and to be able to sing. And all of the children were given that opportunity. Now again, we're specializing. I mean, what are we doing to ourselves? And the research will show you that if you really want to do very well, even in our math scores, is that you want to support the arts. And that's where it would trigger, of course, the use of certain parts of our brain that would then be able to help us in other academics. So when you look at the career clusters, and the data is showing just that. And education is supposed to do just that, is to use the data, read the data, and make the changes according to the data. And now we have this, and now we're going back on track again. On some of the articles, of course, that are given to us, really supports this, and I thank the author for providing that. Because, like I said earlier, if you read on line 27, again on page 2, I think it's still 2, is that the mode of instruction or method of instruction is preparing our students for the world of work. And it always is, and it has not changed, that the primary reasons for education is to prepare our children to be contributing citizens or members to our community. And what is that? It's not just getting a diploma and not breaking the law, which is one of them, and that's great. But preparing all children for the world of work. Because everyone, when they get out of school, they're going to do 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different things as citizens, as contributing members of society. Whether it be to decide to be a homemaker, there's still, of course, the need to be able to have certain skills that you can easily take even with you out to the world of work. Later on, after maybe the children have grown up, or even for some, they have to do both. Many of us have done just that. So, and that, of course, when you read the statement by Secretary Duncan, he was just saying is that whether students are going to a 4-year college or they're just going out to the world of work, they're going to need life skills. And what are we doing to prepare our children for the life skills? All students, whether they're going to career and technical education programs or they're going to the college preparatory skill programs, they need employability skills. So that's why it's important that all of our children would have to go through this program. I think I've just, and then the last thing of all that I like to talk about is, and I said in working with the author on this bill, is that I know that's always been a problem, is the implementation process. And it's always been a problem for those in the receiving ends to say, it's easy for you to mandate this, but you're not giving me the time to do this. What we're doing with this bill is that it is going to provide opportunity and a time to be able to develop these plans and to implement it. And of course, the sooner, the better. Although it has a timeline, but it may be implemented even prior to the designated time of 2014-2015. And I thank the author, of course, for being, supportive in working with us on the amendment or substitution of those bills. So I asked my colleagues for those of you who at the time were seriously considering not supporting this, that there are greater benefits with this program versus where we're at currently, and it would definitely be addressing the needs of a community. And surely for Guam, if you look at the list, all of these definitely the top, 50-60% of them are what our community is asking for. So I thank the author of the bill, and I thank my colleagues as well, and ask for your support. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in full support of Bill 239-31. I'm actually kind of happy that all of the career educators have provided all the key information to the value of this bill prior to my speaking. I, like you, Mr. Speaker, have been taken to task from time to time by those in the education community, and I've deferred and really have learned a lot over the years in terms of my view and my take on particularly the Guam public school system and its ability to prepare our young people for life. It was kind of interesting during the public hearing on this bill, the good author, who I hope would allow me to join as a co-sponsor as well here in her closing maybe. She leaned over to me and we were hearing my bills as well that this body passed in the last session on scholarships, particularly for those most needy in our community. And we sort of exchanged, perhaps we should work together on these issues. And it would seem, actually, as those bills almost were the cart before the horse in terms of what this bill, I believe, is going to do and accomplish. And that is to once again revisit and address the issues of preparing our young people for the future and post-secondary education in a way that invigorates the system and calls to its core mission of working closely with our children and trying to make education more a part of their experience and something that part of their personal development and the movement forward is inclusive of preparation for the future and understanding what the future holds, at least with the snapshot that we can glean in this time. I'll close with this, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that I did as the Director of the Department of Youth Affairs was to really address this issue in terms of how the outcomes could be compared to those young people involved in juvenile delinquency and their experience with enhancing their educational experience and a transformation and change in terms of their schoolwork and passing grades and going on to graduate. And there was a direct correlation to those who righted the ship, if you will, in their educational endeavors to really lessening their chances of future contact with the criminal justice system. But one interesting thing I would do too in talking to young people is just ask them about their experience in the school system and particularly in terms of their contact with their counselors and their career preparation, or just their preparation in general in school. And I found overwhelmingly that there was quite a bit of lacking in that area. And I remembered my experience going through school as early as 8th grade and all the way through high school. I had contact with my counselor on a quarterly basis to track how I was doing, what kind of grades I was getting, and to ensure that the goals that I had set going into high school the track I was on was correct, and that the classes I needed to take were going to get me there. And so I kind of just expressed that personal experience and my personal experience in talking with young people and the need to continually do things that are called for in this legislation to really help our young people. Because as you said, Mr. Speaker, we have extremely talented, intelligent, capable young people if we only do our part to provide them with that light at the end of the tunnel in terms of preparing them for the future. And I think this legislation addresses that very nicely. And I think the retiring speakers earlier kind of talked about the evolution of the system and the need to revisit this once again and keep it at the forefront of how we work with our young people in the school system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to rise in support of this crucial and critical legislation. Tudusmasi.
Thank you very much, Senator Duenas. Any other senators wish to be heard on the bill? If not, I'll invite and recognize the sponsor, Dr. Mabini, to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In listening to all my colleagues who spoke up, who I'm deeply appreciative of, it is true. This bill is bigger than what's presented in the few pages. It's about the discussion of with the partnership of all our institutions. It's talking about industries that we've maybe talked about, but we really don't know what should or how should we blend it into our education system, like green jobs. I just read an important research that came out that said that all classrooms at all grade levels, we need to start teaching our kids not just about computers, but about this term called NIS, Network Information Systems. You and all my colleagues, and I'm sure everybody who's listening today, there is nowhere that, rather everywhere that we go, where we touch, there is some form of network operating in the background. And so all our workers and our students, who are their future career individuals, will need to know what that's about. So it's not just a buzzword. This is not just another task, difficult task we're asking our education leaders to do. This is something that we must do as a community. And in speaking to my the previous speakers, who I highly respect because of their long history and experience in education, the K-12, of which I don't unfortunately have, so I have to defer to them. It is true that there's a lot of hard work that came to the fruition of the existing curriculum structure, and I'm glad that today we're coming back and revisiting, because today's conditions are so different. So I congratulate them for the work that they've done, and I congratulate those today who are willing and to take the risk to make these changes. It's going to take a lot of work, this thing that we call integration. These are a lot of terms that us educators get, but the bottom line is it's going to take a lot of work. We have training that our teachers are going to be needing if we want them to do this. There are support mechanisms like career counselors that we're going to have to provide our schools. We have students who we punish when they bring their cell phones to school, but the reality is practically all of them have it, so how do we start integrating that? So there's a lot of work, and budget, I know budget is right around the corner, and so and I'm sure this bill, should it become law, is something that we're going to have to think about in supporting the needs of our teachers. And just to answer or to speak of one more important point, it is true we do need our stakeholders. In the CTE task force that I have, who have really, and I have to thank, who have helped guided me in the development of this bill, I have in there sitting our actual superintendent of curriculum of instruction. He has his support people attending my task force meeting. We have 2 board members from the Guam Department of Education, 2 of which, one from the University of Guam, one from GCC. We have representatives from Guam Chamber of Commerce and Guam Contractors Association. Not to mention, I appreciate the attendance also of members from or support staff from the Congresswoman's office. So I do have people at the table, and perhaps this is the beginning of a CTE advisory board that may come into existence in order to make this happen. And to answer to some of the concerns that was raised by the previous speakers, the culmination of all of this is coming up to a summit that will be happening in February to begin having these serious discussions. And so I appreciate everybody who's in support of this. It will begin, and I'd love to have this bill presented to them as new law, and that might be the springboard for active discussions at the summit. And in closing, one more thing, I'm sorry. On the 3rd page, there is a small technical amendment I'd like to make. It's on line 3. It says the Board of Education shall develop and implement not vigorous, but rigorous, the letter R. So it's just a typo. So it's rigorous. So if that could be changed, I'd appreciate that. No. I think it should be rigorous for now. Thank you, though.
So hearing no objection, so ordered.
Thank you. And in closing, I asked that I have my fine colleagues who had stood up to express their support to be co-sponsors of the bill. That would include well, all the speakers that had stood up and spoke in support of the bill. I really appreciate it, and for those who may be interested as well. So I appreciate again hearing this bill. It's an exciting morning for me. It is a pinnacle for me, at least for the year, to be here to stand and ask that all my colleagues support Bill number 239-31, which is known as the CARE Act. It stands for College and Career Readiness, or CCARE Act. Sidus Masi, and thank you so much.
On the motion to place the bill in the voting file, any objection? Seeing none, so ordered. It is now after 12. I will call for a lunch recess until 2 o'clock.